Welcome to the PGN Podcast. With this podcast, we're looking to normalise the conversation around flooding. What happens behind the scenes, lifting the curtains on the mystery that can sometimes come into play when you're either involved with flooding or trying to protect your home. We're talking to some experts in the industry and relaying some of the experiences we heard from some communities. Hopefully, after our series, you'll have a bit more information to help yourself or help others in an emergency where flooding is involved. Welcome to the PGN Podcast. I'm Meshi, and that's Carl. Today, we'll be talking about empowered communities. According to the World Health Organization, climate change is the single biggest threat facing humanity. Today, some 6.4 million people live in flood-prone areas. About 1.5 million of those are vulnerable. During this episode, we will look at how valuable public awareness and public engagement is towards the fight to resilient flood management. We believe that community engagement and awareness play a vital role in building sustainable flood resilience.
Yeah, so today we've got two exciting guests to bring to the conversation. Firstly, we've got Lynn Chapman, who is part of Project Groundwater and Northumbria team and is a STEM lead for PGN. And then we've got Scaife, who's another key contributor to PGN and is a community engagement advisor for the environment agency. So Alex, I'll start with you. Obviously, you've been out and about in many communities across the region at risk of flooding. You know, how does flooding affect people and how does it affect the communities as well?
It affects communities in lots of different ways. Depends on sort of their general resilience in the first instance, and that's just general connections between themselves. We find that communities who are better connected with their neighbours and sort of more integrated into the community tend to bounce back a little better. But communities that are kind of more isolated and have residents that maybe can't get to know their neighbours, we find those struggle the most. In terms of effect with sort of communities that are connected, they kind of work together first and foremost. We call them category 0 responders because they are first on the ground. They can see exactly what's going on, and they tend to be rushing around and sort of it's quite a very extreme thing to experience for them, and it can be quite traumatic, and even more so for further down the spectrum where you have people who have never experienced a flood before, won't have any insurance, they won't have any sort of stake in the house or anything like that. They're kind of renting it and they lose their belongings as well, and that's quite a traumatic experience in itself because we find these people have a lot of things that are very precious to them that get lost in the floods, and also it can even extend to loss of life for some people. So it can be quite extreme.
Yeah, I mean, in previous podcasts, we've covered the different sources of flooding. So things like surface water, river flooding, and I think depending on the source of flooding depends on how people or communities can prepare. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the key challenges across the region is the urban v the rural communities mm-hmm. as such. Is there any sort of distinct differences between urban communities and rural communities and how they would potentially respond to flooding?
Yeah, we find most rural communities are very well connected. They'll have a structure already in place where they'll lend on each other anyway because so everything's so far away anyway. Yeah. But that is a bit of a sweeping statement. We have found communities that are isolated. And so it really does depend on when you go into the communities, what you kind of look for that when, like in my job, for example, we just kind of go into the community, speak to everybody and just door knock and just find out who knows who. We do find that they are better connected than urban communities. Yeah. Urban communities are quite disconnected but more in contact with their links services. So they'll have better connections with their police and sort of emergency responders and things like that. But they won't have interconnected that first category 0 first response.
I think that's because of the type of lives they live. Like you've got a busier life in the city with both parents maybe's working, but maybe's out in the country. Mm-hmm. You probably only have, you probably do you have a different lifestyle altogether. Mm-hmm. So you probably do get to see each other crossing the street and are the older communities?
Definitely. I mean, it is a sweeping statement because you do find unique pots where you've got this huge urban community that is very well connected, lots of surface water issues and things like that. But they will not trust the the services that are around them because of the authority, and they might have certain sort of but really good interconnected with themselves. But that is pockets, and we find the generic statement is that urban communities are less connected with each other.
So I think we've used a word there, and perhaps we need to kind of revisit what we mean when we talk about resilience. What is resilience?
It depends who you ask. So resilience to me is really well interconnected community with their links. We have a really nice triangular diagram, which is communities, services, and amenities, resources. And all of those things need to be linked for me to think that this is a resilient community. However, if you go into another community, we've interviewed a community about resilience, and their resilience is that being able to ring somebody and ask for a cup of sugar, or just that kind of like neighborly aspect, that's their resilience. They don't see having a connection with authorities or having a ton of resources as a resilience thing, because more often than not, when we do have floods, sometimes those things don't come quick enough, and so they lose faith with those things, and maybe they would prefer to rely on themselves. So it depends. Yeah, it really does depend on who you ask.
Would you say it's an ability to recover?
Absolutely. From our point of view, absolutely. It's how quick you can bounce back.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to those at risk of flooding, or even those who don't know they're at risk of flooding, to be better prepared or more resilient to flooding? What could they do to help themselves?
Well, this is our day job. So I would recommend that everybody looks at their risk. And everyone who thinks they're not at risk, just check. Yeah. We have a government website that you can check for future flooding, and that tells you your medium or low or high risk.
Is that the Environment Agency maps, surface water maps?
It uses the Environment Agency maps, but it's just on .gov website. You can literally just check for flooding, and it'll take you to all those places. You can also, if you are in a flood zone, you can sign up to Flood Warning Service, which is something that I think this project is trying to do in the long term as well for groundwater, but this is just for fluvial, which is river flooding.
Just about to point out.
Save the day there.
We also have, I would also recommend everyone to get involved in their local community, going to meetings, going to community action partnerships and things like that. It just puts you on the map as if you are at risk, it just puts you in the community's eye to kind of keep an eye on you. I would also say join a flood group, create a flood group if you find you are at risk. Also, get insurance if you can. It severely outweighs the damages, that month-to-month cost. And people who have flooded before and maybe struggling with insurance, go to Flood Re. Just literally type in online Flood Re, and it'll explain everything about that. And then finally, if you can afford it, get property level resilience like floodgates and non-return valves as well, things like that.
Yeah, non-return air bricks and things like that, because people don't always appreciate that the water's actually coming when it comes up through the ground as well. It could be sitting under your floorboards.
Absolutely.
Or it can get in through your air bricks, and your threshold of your property could be higher, and that can create, damp and things like that.
Absolutely.
People don't always appreciate. I was going to pick up on something you said earlier on, because it's the mental health of all of this. And I always remember a Red Cross lady talking about how she'd visited this woman who'd lived in a house for 50 years. Her husband had died. And she was saying the strange thing was, it wasn't necessarily the furniture or anything like that. It was the fact that she kept nagging her husband to plaster, to stick back down the wallpaper. And it just peeled off over years, and she kept on at him, and then he passed away, and nothing happened. So then she just left it because it was that nostalgia. And it always gets me, because she said once she was flooded, the thing is that you're then decorating your house out of like necessity, not because you want to, not because it's a nice thing to do. And those little memories that you had, that silly little bit of wallpaper was just stripped away from her just in a moment. So I think to get the Flood Re, which is Flood RE, isn't it? To get those like insurances or to get those things is really important. I think people, they don't always appreciate it. And it's that, the mental health. And I just wanted to pick up on the resilience as well, because I think you made a valid point about how it means different things to different people. And I think as us as people who are doing research, we need to appreciate that when we work with our partners like local authorities, the Environment Agency or NW, the police, the fire service, people can't, they've got a limited resource. So, and also in the initial instance, if it's a big flood, it's quite hard to get people to where they need to be.
Yeah.
And if the police tell you need to leave, you need to leave. You know, you have to go, because once the electricity goes out or once the water's getting cut off, that's it, you're isolated, and they might have already moved on to another area. So I think we don't always have although we try to portion our resource really quickly, they don't always have it. And I think that's why it means something different to the authorities as well, you know.
And I think as well, being on that kind of reactive side in the past, you know, for a local authority, you go out and you respond to the incident, but one resident might have called the local authority to get the highway drains cleared, for example. The other might have called Northumbrian Water, and it might be when you go out on site, you see it to clear one or the other, but then two you know, crews turn up at the same incident, but only one can actually fix it. That other crew could have been deployed somewhere else, because the likelihood is in an event like this, there's many localized incidents, and because of the way the rainfall is and the traffic is, they're very hard to get between. You know, so I think again that coordination and that education and understanding to at-risk communities is key, so the right people are reported or engaged, and then it can come out and solve that problem quicker.
Yeah, it's a big part of what we do.
But to add to that, though, again, around the resilience, because you've talked about, again, sweeping statements, but the kind of differences between rural communities and metropolitan and more kind of urbanized communities. And I think when you see extraordinary rainfall events, so what you call emergency scenarios, particularly on the news, what you tend to see is when these communities come together. So you hear stories about, how the neighbor got sandbags for the neighbor down the street who's probably vulnerable or less mobile or things like that. And it's taking that to the next step, because sandbags, I think you see it all the time. It's like the sandbags pop up and everything else. And we're talking more and more about property flood resilient measures, because actually those are already fitted into your home. So it's less about finding a sandbag and more just engaging your door. For example, if you have a flood door, if you have the air bricks are just engaged automatically as and when. And it's, I guess for us, part of the conversation is how do we get communities more invested, or to invest in those type of measures where they kick in when required. You don't have to you don't have to be present. You can still call the emergency services, you can still call the appropriate authorities, but you have a kind of first stop. It's there to give you a little bit of peace of mind to perhaps help you go, right, okay, I know that's for the next couple of hours, I've got something there to hold back the floods while the kind of like the support systems are on the way based on whatever else is happening.
Yeah, and I think as well, you know, dealing firsthand with residents on flooding events. You know, you hear that there's a weather warning, say, from a Met Office, particularly for surface water flooding and rainfall. You never know how much is going to come down. You know, Great North Run Day, that was excessive. That was as bad as Thunder Thursday. Luckily, it happened on a Sunday afternoon, so I don't think the impact was as bad as, you know, working time on a Thursday. But I can remember after Thunder Thursday, I had residents ring up when there was a bad weather forecast saying, "Is my house going to flood?" And they were taking half days from work, and it's that panic, it's that mental concern. And I think things like PFR give that level of assurance, but PFR only works if it's maintained and if it's installed and if it's managed properly, and it also only has a certain life. And
PFR being
property flood resilience. Sorry, So obviously in the industry, you know, it's been PLR, property level resilience, PLP,
yes.
property level protection,
yes.
and now it's PFR, which is property flood resilience.
We need to get rid of the acronyms.
There's too many
acronyms.
I think we need, as part of this podcast, just to have sort of a thesaurus of dictionary of acronyms. Yeah.
But just to build on what you're saying, I think part of the resilience as well, and what people need to appreciate, is that nothing's going to get fixed in a day. You'll get your emergency responders dealing with the situation as it unfolds, and they will do their best with the resources they have available at that time to do whatever they can. But actually, the damage that is sometimes done to property and people's businesses and things like that can actually go on for months, because you're talking about then you've got to get a skip guy to come and, you know, you've got to load the skips up, or you've got to get heaters in to air out the house and things like that. You could be displaced from your home for like 6 months in a hotel. And if you've got young children, or you've got an elderly resident or some, you know, like, and actually what's really sad, some of the reports that came through after 2012, what we realised was that a lot of the elderly people who'd been living quite well on their own were then displaced from the home, and the children were saying, who were probably themselves in the 40s or 50s or even 60s, were saying, I realise my parents never going to go back to their house now. And this is, I think, one of the things when we talk about resilience is being prepared to have that backup plan, because you might actually be displaced for a large number of months before things are rectified, you know. So sometimes it might even just be a case of, can I get stuff upstairs to protect these things, you know? And as well, like, it's silly things as well, isn't it? It's like, I could go out today, I could fill my cupboard with £100 worth of food, and, you know, it's going to be trashed if it gets flooded, you know? And that's quite a lot of money when we're talking about all these other concerns that are happening in the world, like crisis living in that. So I think when we talk about resilience, it's, and having that community engagement, or having that backup plan. It could even be like, can my sister put us up for a couple of months? You know, like, you know, how do I manage the school run if I live in one area of the city, but the hotel's 4 miles away now, you know, and I don't have a car, you know, so it's not just for this. I mean, you can apply this to anything, really, couldn't you? You know, any disaster. But
you've touched on exactly why it's hard to engage sometimes, because we will go into those types of communities who deal with that daily without the flooding, without anything. You know, they get displaced, or just for financial reasons or whatever, and you try and engage with a community that suffers from that, and it's a struggle, because I don't want to know about flooding right now. It's not my first priority. No, you know, I want to put food on my table, and I want to speak to, you know, I need to get my kids to school, just, you know. So we have to be very careful about how we engage and prepare.
And also, I mean, with the insurance, it's not going to pay out straight away. And if you don't, most people don't even have £500 saved in their account. So if you don't have access to go somewhere, you know, it's not just as simple as saying, oh, check me selling the Ritz for the weekend. You know, like, it's for some people, that's just not a reality, you know.
I think, again, it's coming back to being better prepared. And therefore, and in a position to then respond accordingly. And that could be through PFR, where you have measures at your home, which means that actually when it does show up unexpectedly, you're less likely to be out of your home for 9 months, because actually there's the planning. There is, like you said, Lynn, what happens? Can I move everything upstairs? How quickly can I do that? What are my escape routes? What is the emergency plan? The emergency plan is actually part of the development process.
Yeah, obviously.
So it's actually giving our communities the tools, the access to have control over what that plan is. I think that's what we're talking about. Yeah. You have primary control.
It's autonomy, isn't it?
Yes, you have autonomy. So you know that actually I might not know if it's gonna flood bad enough to reach my home. I might be on holiday. I'm on holiday. I want to enjoy a bit of summer sun, and I put on the news and they said it's raining up in Newcastle. But I know that before I walked out my door, I'd locked my door and my air bricks are there, or my barriers behind my garage door is there. So yes, it might build up on my street, but I might come home to 5 inch, like a little bit of water, as opposed to my whole downstairs flooded. So there's a difference.
Yeah, and I think as well, a key part of that, as you said, if you're away, you want peace of mind. But if you're there and it happens, instead of panicking, it's knowing what to do. So, you know, I think a flood plan, you know, and again, working with not just yourself, but the people who've been in your similar roles for a long time. You know, we went around, you know, particularly in this instance, businesses, about telling them to get a flood plan in place where they were at risk of river flooding. How important is a flood plan, and what should it include?
It's extremely important, and it should be, in my opinion, it should be separate to a business continuity plan if you are at high risk. It should always be a part of any business continuity plan, but for high risk locations, it's extremely important, because it highlights how, very, very quickly on a piece of paper, it should be very easy to read, sort of what you need to do.
Yeah, bullet pointed.
Who you need to contact, who you need to speak to, you know, what do you need to do first? Does the property have flood resilience that they need to activate? You know, are they in contact with the area? Do they have an area of flood resilience? Is something going on there? And it just kind of brings all of that information into one place. And I think it's extremely important when you're in a sort of kerfuffle and you're kind of panicking, you think something's coming, because you tend to get a little bit of a warning, not always, but a little bit of a warning that flooding's coming. So you can go and check something and just quickly run down the list. And I think that's a critical thing for businesses, especially when you're thinking about insurance.
I think as well, like I know we're talking about our own project today, but I think one of the important things to think about and consider is that there are so many, like if you're a person at home and you are probably listening to this now, you're, oh my God, I've got to worry about flooding, I've got to worry about drought, I've got to worry about heat waves, I've got to worry about, my family crisis that day or whatever it is. But I think if you can try and like merge these plans so that you're not thinking, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed by having 10 different plans. If you can just have one plan that can maybe cover a few things, do you think that would probably help quite a bit? Because I know myself, just even today, trying to get you dealing with, the kids and the other half being away and thinking, oh my God, I've got to get my hair washed because it looks like it's stuck to my head just so I can look presentable, was an absolute challenge now. Yeah. And it wasn't really raining, it was a little drizzle. So I was worried that, I'd end up with some kind of frizz bomb out here. Was a challenge. But if somebody threw in the mix flooding, then I'd be like, oh my goodness, this is even more than flooding and a heat wave on the same day. What a dream.
I think it's all about priority, and I think you check your risk. If it's a low risk, then it's probably not going to be high up on your agenda, but if you might find it's high and you didn't know, and it's something you have to prepare for. And I think this, again, it's just looking at your particular situation and understanding what priorities mean the most to you. But just having the knowledge in the first instance is the first step to understanding what you need to put forward. I think 2012's done us a favour, hasn't it? Because it's put us on a platform. It's made people a little bit more aware, but I think it's just continuing to try and get that awareness, because if you're informed and you've got the facts and you know how to respond, then you're going to have, like you say, you can become more resilient and you're going to get through this a lot. I'm not going to say you're going to sail through it, pardon the pun, but you'll get through it a lot simpler.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we still have is the kind of setting when once the flood's gone, it's behind you. And I think it's still it's a big concern for us because of climate change, these events are actually occurring more and more often. At the start of this episode, I did say about the statistics, 6.4 million people living in flood-prone areas, but it's the 1.5 million of these people living in vulnerable neighborhoods. So that's people that on low incomes with poor health and other factors that means floods are likely to have a more negative impact. So
and that's just the UK.
Yes, this basically it's come from the present and future vulnerability, flood vulnerability, risk and disadvantage, a UK scale assessment. So this is looking at the UK, and I think that's the issue, that overwhelmingly the people who are most at risk are already very vulnerable, and like you said, Alex, they already have 1,000,001 things to worry about. And what we want to try and do is not overwhelm them anymore, but support them and make flood risk resilience a kind of a conscious part of their life. And I think that's what we're trying to, part of this conversation is doing that, really, just talking openly about what that could look like, but also whether both of you have really good experiences with working with communities. Are there any tips? Are there any initiatives that worked in certain groups that we could look to scale up? You talk about community action groups and support networks and things like that, Alex?
I think for me, don't like lie. And I'm not saying people go out from authorities and lie, but don't try and bluff your way through it. Actually just be factual with people and be honest and say, look, we don't actually have the answers, but we're prepared to work with you. And I think what I've found from community engagement is in the past, we've often turned up and gone, on other projects I've worked on, we've gone, right, we've got this great idea. And then the public have looked at you and they've gone, no. And you're like, oh, right, why? Yeah. Well, actually, did you know about this river, this river down here? Now, to them, it might be a river. You might turn up and it's just a dug ditch that somebody's put in, but it was collecting water. Or you suddenly realise that where they think water should go, you're like, well, can I quite do that? Because it would have to be pumped and we might not have the money or something. But it's turning up and having that engagement with them way before you want to implement anything, because it's about taking them on the journey. And as much as you're taking them on the journey, you want to go on their journey with them, because it's the only way we're going to learn, because it's the boots on the ground that have that knowledge, that experience. Like you mentioned somebody earlier on, and how his dad lived locally when we were talking before we came on air, and how they had a lot of experience, and it's so valuable. And it feeds in.
I mean, referring, Lynn's spot on there with when we as project managers, or looking at capital programs, medium-term plans, we've got to do a study first to look at all of the options. That study in itself takes 2 years, and then it's probably 3 to 5 years after that to fund it and construct it. But you do that study, and you come with what you feel is the best option, as Lynn said there, and the public don't necessarily buy into that. And comms engagement training have said that's a do and defend approach, or design and defend. Alex, sort of what through the Environment Agency, what engagement tactics have been used on projects to help the public and communities be more involved in shaping that project?
We do a lot of consultations a lot earlier now in our projects. So we did have that design and defend, I think, a little while ago. But now it's really evident that the communities have much more valuable information for us. And so we do a lot of consultations, and we have our project leads go into the communities and speak directly to focus groups and things like that. And anyone who's interested kind of speak to us, we kind of hold them in and get them sat down in a chair. And that has really had a great effect on how we operate. I can think of several projects currently that are kind of going on that have changed because of the community participation. I think when you're looking at kind of scaling up things, I do find that a volunteer network is 100% the way forward, because they are part of the community. They are willing to give their time.
And they're living with it.
Absolutely. And during Storm Babette that just happened, our flood warden network in Northumberland was incredible in providing that information on the ground of what was really going on. And we had... there was an instance where there's a bit of misinformation that had happened. I can't really go into detail with it, but it was negated by the community because they were connected with us. And so that meant that community didn't actually have such a emotional response to some bit of information that had come out. They were well aware of it, and that was something that I thought was incredible success. And I think just lending to what you said about trust and about being open and honest, and I think we can if we are more connected. And that has to come through a volunteer network that are trusted by the community.
Before you say, I just want to build on that, because I think people are looking at us for the answers anyway, especially during panic times. It's hard to build up trust, and once it's gone, it's gone. And I think it's okay to say, look, we actually don't always have the answers. That's why we need your input. But can I just build on what you were saying about design and defend, just for anybody who's listening to this are probably thinking, what are you talking about? So in the past, we've always like Carl explained about the project and how long it can take, and then we design a solution, and then we take it to the community, and then we tend to defend why we came with this. And what Alex is saying is that actually, if we take a step back and we take, before we even designed it, we take to the public or business or whoever, we say, this is our research, this is what it's telling us, this is what we're thinking about. How do you think this would play out here? Because where we might just think, oh, well, we want to put a ditch there. Somebody might go, we're going to plan on putting a football field there. And then we could design it around it being like, well, not a ditch, like an attenuation.
Yeah, a football pitch that could work as an attenuation area when it's raining.
So we're taking, it's better to take on what the community, how they're using that area, that space, and then design around that where we can. It's not always going to be the answer, but that's obviously how we want to go. It's all about the journey.
It's that two-way street, and kind of making the community understand the limitations.
Ultimately, though, one of the things that we hear a lot, particularly when I was in Northumbrian Water, and I was in Northumbrian Water when Thunder Thursday happened, and there were two parts to what I observed as part of someone going into people's homes. The first was having someone come and see you and say, tell us what happened. Not on a phone call, not through a report, just tell me what happened. It's a bit of a therapy, isn't it? You're like, oh, right, you're here to hear about my experience, just that personal, and they can essentially confide in you. And it's not about in that moment giving them the answers. It's just like, just tell me what you went through.
So sometimes I think when you go into those situations, you are
I want to cry.
a verbal.
So
You do. You want to cry. It's very emotive for them, and you know you took this job on because you want to help people and you want to improve their quality of life, and sometimes you feel like you can't help them, and that's really upsetting. But also as well, they need someone to vent off to. They need, and they'll say, oh, it's a council, or it's Northumbrian Water, or it's EA's fault, and because flooding's a natural occurrence, like nature at some point always wins, and we need to make sure we're there, and we almost need mental health support as well as the residents, because we're trying to meet their expectations, but I think we need to make sure that we're there to listen, we're there to absorb, and we're trained. People are better trained to do that as well.
It's just devastating, isn't it? Very important information comes through that way.
Yeah, but it's the first step. I think when we talk about community engagement, the first step is tell us your experience. I think there is not, so the rest is priceless or whatever, but actually someone feeling heard and feeling seen is one of those things where you can't put money on. So we can talk about the capital projects and everything else, but if you start from a place of we see you, we hear you, and this is for you, and the solution might still be the same because the technical experts and everything else, but it's actually the solution will be done on the basis that they've had a chance to feed into what they need, and it's come from the source. And I think that's the bit where it changes the dynamics completely.
Absolutely.
And if something does happen, there is an established trust there, because they're like, oh, but we trust you because you've done this with us before, and we know that when we speak to you, that's going to get to the right place. And and I feel like sometimes, and a lot of lessons are being learned from 2012. Should we say? A lot of lessons have been learned from 2012.
Even before then, when people were flooding, I think we've learned a lot. We've heard people talk recently in the summer and how they've had such a bad experience and in the past. And I think what's really hard as well, in the past, there was no local flood authorities as such, so you might just get put through to a highways guy, and he wouldn't have had the training. He wouldn't have known. But and when you're talking about trust as well, I think sometimes people are a bit frightened to tell us, because they're like, well, if I tell you, you might go tell somebody else. And it's like, well, actually, we can't because of data protection laws and things like that. And so it is about that trust. Yeah.
And I think to stress that the trust, obviously, that information's sensitive, and local authorities or consultants working on behalf of local authorities, when we're doing these surveys, we do treat it as such as well with Northumbrian Water, And I think bringing this back to Meshi's point, and you can probably elaborate on this as well, that's the importance of community engagement, because what you were saying, if you knock on one door and then you go to the next door and they're like, oh, I don't want to speak to you, but by the time you've worked your way down the street, Mr. Blogs at number one might go, well, actually, they were really good. They were canny, and we had a good chat, and I felt I was heard. I felt my problem was halved, and that might encourage more people to come forward.
We had that. We had that back in 2012 when I was with the back then property level protection, but again property flood resilience, and Northumbrian Water at the time essentially put a large amount of investment. We recognise that these capital schemes take sometimes several years to get on the ground. So the team I was with, we got to go out to communities, we got to sit down with them, and we're like, look, we can install these measures for you, provided by Northumbrian Water. We can do that in a very short period, comparatively short period of time. And it was very one-on-one. It was with the home, it was around their needs, it's around how they use their home. And when we first went into some of these estates, and there was a few large estates in the area, we had people that were like, distrust of the system. I didn't flood. I don't trust that you're gonna share that with you're probably gonna share with insurance. We're like, no, I don't want to listen to what you're saying. I didn't flood. But we had people in the community that said, I did flood, and can you help me, and anything you can do. And we started there, and we had those conversations, and it was like, tell us what happened. What did you see? What did you notice? And we walked them through perhaps something they'd noticed and not understood the impact of what they were seeing. And then we went through how they lived, how they used their homes, for example. They said, I don't want flood barriers on the outside because people know when I'm on holiday. I was like, okay, we'll put it on the inside of your garage. No one's going to be any wiser. That's how we worked. It was pretty much on a property by property, home by home assessment. And then what happened was exactly that, Lynn. The neighbours talking to neighbours, And they were calling me. So, I mean, we had them on the list to call, but they were calling me. They were like, oh, I spoke to so-and-so and she said to call you. And they had my mobile number as well.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Meshi, you don't know me, but... And I was like, okay. And then we have those who said they didn't flood, going, well, actually, I'm not saying I did, but I may have. And that was the door. That was how we started. And some of these projects, when we were investigating it, had a handful. We knew there was a bigger issue because the technical modelling was saying there's a bigger issue. We didn't have the numbers, the reported numbers to say there's a bigger issue. And in that particular example, it helped the projects because those numbers went up. The trust happened. The numbers went up. They got the benefit of these measures, again, fairly short term. And we say short term because we're quick to say they're not solutions. But actually, if you think about it, those were adaptive measures to homes that with care and love, and we're teaching them how to live with those products as well. We're actually in an extreme or extraordinary weather would respond better than just a traditional underground system.
Can we just pick up on something as well? Because I don't want to give because everyone's like, I know we've mentioned insurance companies a couple of times and I don't want them to get like, feel targeted. I feel like we're giving them a bad rep because insurance companies work on risk.
Yes.
So my other half works for an insurance company, but he works on life insurance for people basically and health insurance. And the company he works for actively promote you being fit. So the fitter you are with the smartwatch, your insurance comes down that month. Basically, I think roughly is what he said from what I pick up. So actually, if you will have to find out for sure, but I'd imagine if you did put property level protection in place, then you're reducing your risk of getting flooded. So it's not necessarily that the next time you get a renewal,
we did
it's
do
be
that
through the roof.
We did do that.
Yeah.
So I don't want them to feel like we're talking.
The measures. So with regards to products, there are a range of resilience products out there. Many of them come with a British Standard Kite mark. Yes. So they're recognized. British Standard Kite mark. And another side to that story is when we came to the end, because we were using products that had the British Standard. They were flood-proof tested, British Standard approved. As part of that project, we used to write to the customer as part of the handover package. And we wrote basically a letter saying, this is what's been installed. And this is the kite mark, this is the information about the project. And I know several customers who had really good insurance companies gave that to the insurance and it was recognized. So that's the full circle of what we went through with a lot of residents.
And I think you made a really good point there where you go out and about the communities and you get very different responses. And I think a lot of that is dependent on how a property's owned or managed. So, take a street where you've got 3 houses next to each other. Okay, so the first one's managed by a housing company, tenanted. They would ring up the housing company. The housing company would come out and repair that. That would probably go through to the lead local flood authority because it's already came into an arm or a department of the council. And that would be through the resilience team of a mop-up, as it would be. And then you've got a tenant of a private landlord. They would ring their private landlord and they would come out and get it fixed. As local authorities, we might not know. It's kind of fix it and move on. And then finally, you've got your private homeowner and, they might either report to Northumbrian Water, report to the council, or they may just repair it themselves and say, I don't want anyone to know I've flooded because it'll affect the value of my property. So you've got 3 houses right next to each other that have all flooded, but you're going to get very different ways of how that's managed and how that risk's sort of acknowledged in the future. And I think that's really important. But I mean, one of the questions I want to ask you, Alex, is how much has social media had to play on community engagement and responding to incidents? Obviously, there's a platform there where a lot of people can share photos and what's happening, but also as well, are incidents getting exaggerated? Is it becoming a help or a hindrance? Because I think there's balance to either side on that.
It's a double-edged sword. So we know a lot more about floods nowadays in terms of when it's happening because everyone's taking a picture to put on their social media or share with their families and just kind of, or even just for people are more included nowadays and we'll do it for insurance as well. And then share that picture online. We find community groups online on Facebook, for example, they tend to have like really great sort of timelines. If we can sort of access those and if we can sort of speak to the people that kind of run those, they tend to provide us with great information of how it kind of went. The other side of that is obviously you get a little bit of sensationalism. So you'll have someone with big bold letters like kind of it's flooding, react now, and everyone kind of goes, oh my god, and sort of like they haven't had the flood warning through yet, and because it can go right down to a house being flooded and the next house isn't.
Yeah.
So because the way the topography is, or just how the urban topography is, and so it's alarming, and it can be quite stressful for people as much as it is useful for us.
Yeah.
And also you can have quite a political fallout with it as well, locally, and also it can lose faith with actually we've done an amazing job at getting there quick, doing all of this work behind the scenes. But if we're not present there in social media telling people that that's what's going on, there can be a completely different story, and that story can be completely negative, and we've just lost the faith.
Can I just pick up on this, because this is like what you're saying about this. So the other confusing thing for a lot of people around this is when you get groundwater flooding isn't going to necessarily happen it might, but it might not necessarily going to happen on the same day that it rains. So because by the time it takes the water to percolate through the ground, travel through the ground and find its exit point could be months, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be days later. And you could be a resident at home and all of a sudden somebody's saying it's flooding. And if the title just says flooding and there's no picture and you're looking outside and you think, well, it's spring and it's sunny.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's flooding? It can't be flooding because there's no rain, but actually it could be groundwater flooding. And that's the difference when we're having this awareness of how to recognise the different types of flooding. Or it could be from the sewer.
But again, I think with groundwater flooding, it's slow and it's constant and it's a different risk and it's a different threat, and it's kind of again
it presents itself differently.
It does present itself differently, and if water's coming out of ground in summer, but then it continues to winter, that can become a slipping or tripping hazard, or that can erode away an embankment that could potentially cause a landslip, for example. And it's posing different risks where surface water flooding, that water goes as quick as it comes, but you've got no warning whatsoever. A river, depending on which river, you can have hours notice.
Yeah, definitely.
And time to prepare for it. So, for example, a quayside, you can deploy a barrier because you've got enough time to notice.
Yeah. I think one thing to touch
that's
on...
tidal flooding on the time.
It is, yes.
Referring to there.
would just be that we do have places called rapid response catchments, which flood. We had an area which flooded within half an hour. It was 1.7 meters within half an hour, because of a cloudburst. In that local area, we had no gauges in that local area, so we couldn't actually give out the warning when we needed to. So it's the other issue as well is that with communities, they don't care where the flooding came from.
No.
And it's all they are concerned with the fact that it's flooded. And I think we have to be careful when we're dealing with communities. We have to be very sensitive, and that, when we're asking questions about where it came from, they're like, I don't know, it's just in my house, and you have to really sort of be sensitive with it.
They're not experts.
No.
Absolutely.
No. They're not
They can
experts.
tell you really critical information. You just need to be sensitive about how you get there, and dealing with people who have been traumatized through whatever mechanism of flooding happened.
I always say that we need to look at it as how the emergency system works, the first response team. That the person it's like a triage. The person calling you doesn't necessarily, they have no medical expertise. They're just saying, this is happening to me, I need help.
Yeah.
And we are the ones who work in the system, and we should be able to get that information off them, leave them reassured.
Yes.
We will be there for you, but take the responsibility for figuring out what type of flooding it is.
Absolutely.
And we can talk about this forever.
Yeah.
But if you had a crystal ball and you had to look into the future, and the question was, what was the biggest transformative, disruptive change you can bring into community engagement that would essentially help with sustainability and flood risk management in the future?
Oh, it's a tough one, that one. I think the biggest change I would like to see in sort of a disruptive way would be for scheme consultants to work with communities first, and also expand our network 3,000-fold, and have people that we could kind of upskill further from the volunteer to expert level, who can speak to consultants when they're developing schemes. Because I feel that sometimes with consultants, they do miss that. And unless we ask for it as a client and we say, this is how we want to build it, sometimes that's really missed. And I think that would be the biggest change I would like to see. And I honestly would just put the community that every single conversation we have about scheme, flooding, or any kind of cost benefit ratio, we have the community right there, understood and in it.
So making the community the first client.
Absolutely.
From
100%. That would be mine.
And as well, Alex, I think that's a really valuable view, because your role is something that is not something that's national. Mm-hmm. It's something obviously that's only in the Northumbria region. Mm-hmm. And I think, a lot of people could learn from your expertise and experience. So I think that's really good. But Lynn, I'd like to kind of put a question to you as well in relation to that. Obviously, you've done a lot of STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths work in schools. And I think, it would be great to get your understanding about kind of a crystal ball moment of, how do we use the future, the children, the engineers of tomorrow, or what have you?
You're gonna call Whitney Houston, aren't you?
Yeah.
So
Karaoke favourite, yeah.
Before I say mine, I've got a title for you. Yours can be Power to the People, PTP, because I know Carl likes an acronym.
That's a good one. I like that.
Definitely Power to the People.
And that's my email signature.
Yeah. I think from a STEM perspective, the thing that I really want the project to achieve is to have children, and not just children, if anybody, if schools want to come forward, high schools, or if people want to come forward, because you know what, we're all learning. I heard something great on the radio. Well, it was sad, but so the oldest runner ran the Great North Run this year, and he was 102, and he's just recently passed away. And I thought, and as I was driving here, I thought, oh my God, that is great that this guy, at this age, it took him 5 hours, and I thought, Jesus, I don't even think I could do it in 5 hours. And I'm like, nowhere near his age. Not quite. And I was thinking, if he can learn to do something, if he can take on a new challenge at a time when maybe he feels more vulnerable, more at risk, and he said he felt like still very young, and he says, as long as you walk 2 miles a day and you dance your heart singing kind of thing. And I thought, well, this is great, because this is what I want to achieve with children. I want everybody to learn about, especially in our region, about the different types of jobs out there. Mm-hmm. And if we can do that through letting people know that science is not just you turning up and learning about, the circulatory system in biology, or, some kind of chemistry or something like that. And it's more than that, and it has application. And that application is for anybody to do. And to the children of the future, you can be anything you want to be, is my big message. If you start out in it at the minute, because when I was at school, you had dream crushers. Ugh. So what I'm wanting to do is I want kids to start dreaming that they can crush it and they can be the best. So if they want to be an engineer in the highways, or if they want to be a design engineer, or if they want to work in media, if your initial goal is to be an influencer, great. Look at what those influencers can do. How can they influence our communities? How can they tell us about flooding? What kind of skill sets do you need? That's what I want to see children get passionate about. I want them to take their passion, and I want them to understand that, if you're, Kieran Trippier, for example, he didn't just get there and be perfect for 90 minutes. He spent hours and hours and hours of practice and training and learning and understanding the game and reading about the game and, sitting there looking at statistics and things like that. You could be anything you want to be, and I want you just to be passionate, and I want you to take it forward, and I want you to go, okay, I'm learning about climate change at school, so how can I do something? What job can I do? Well, actually, you can be a drainage engineer, or you can work for the Environment Agency, or you could be a hydrologist, or you could just be anything you want to be. That's my big message. You can be anything you want to be.
Well, on that note, I think we'll bring this to a close. So thank you both so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
It's been brilliant.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thanks for listening to the PGN podcast today. We hope you found it informative and enjoyable. If you did, please like and subscribe to the podcast. But also, please, if you find this useful to anyone else, pass it on and spread the word.
To find out more about Project Groundwater Northumbria, please visit www.pgn.org.uk.